Welcome to the Jurassic Park-Cast, the Jurassic Park podcast where guests chat with me about Michael Crichton's 1990 novel Jurassic Park, and also Not That Too. Welcome to episode 31, Stegosaur, recorded on September 12th, 2022. The Queen is dead. Long live the King. My name's Ryan Rogers, and I'm a big dumb Jurassic Park fan. Thanks for joining me today. A continued thank you to Christoph Oakes of Snail, S-N-A-L-E. Check out his incredible album on Spotify and Bandcamp. Today's intro is from the song Hummingbird, and our outro is Sacrifice to the Inhuman Creature. There's some corrections today. Pathetic fallacy is not when the weather sets the mood or foreshadows an impending disaster. That's just foreshadowing. Pathetic fallacy is when an inanimate object is given human emotions, like personification. Yes, human qualities can be given to the weather, and so then yes, that would be pathetic fallacy. But having devastating things happen during a devastating storm isn't pathetic fallacy. A storm brewing before a dark moment for your heroes is simply foreshadowing. And almost every movie does it. Jurassic Park does it. Gremlins 2 does it. And well, that's all the examples you really need, really. I had no idea what a martinet was. All my life I thought this was a reference to like a puppet or like a weasel or something. But no. A martinet is a strict disciplinarian, so in the quote, particularly the little martinet standing beside him in the control room on page 146 said by Muldoon, or thought by Muldoon, I thought this was a metaphor, but turns out a martinet is just a strict disciplinarian, which I guess is sort of an exaggeration on Hammond, but really more just of an adjective than a metaphor, and so that is my mistake. If I was quoting Tim Murphy where he yells, "Stop the car!" with exclamation into the podcast while you were driving, I hope you weren't confused and thought I was yelling at you to stop the car. And I can see now how that might have been distracting and distressing. I am sorry. Dinosaur news. Africa's oldest dinosaurs reveal early suppression of dinosaur distribution. A paper published in the journal Nature in August 2022 names a new late Triassic sauropodomorph, which was unearthed during excavations which occurred over the 2017 and 2019 seasons. The article was more specifically focusing on examining paleolatitudinal endemism, and that's a mouthful as I understand it. Dinosaurs are believed to have been highly endemic in the late Triassic, or that they lived in a singular geographic area for a period of time before dispersing. So, if dinosaurs initially dispersed under paleolatitudinal-driven endemism, then theoretically an assemblage similar to those found in South America and India, where some of the earliest dinosaurs have been discovered, should also be present in Carnian deposits of South-Central Africa. The authors investigated, are there Carnian assemblages in South-Central Africa similar to those of South America and India? Well, in this paper they report on, quote, a new assemblage from Zimbabwe that includes Africa's oldest definitive dinosaurs, including a nearly complete skeleton of the sauropodomorph Imbirosaurus wraithii. It also included other Carnian-aged critters like a Herrerasaurid, cynodonts, an armored crocodilian relative, and rhynchosaurs, all fossils typically found in Indian and South American formations of the same time period. Quote, this assemblage resembles other dinosaur-bearing Carnian assemblages, suggesting that a similar vertebrate fauna ranged into high-latitudinal Australopithecus. The distribution of the first dinosaurs is correlated with paleolatitudinal-linked climatic barriers. The dinosaurian dispersal to the rest of the supercontinent was delayed until these barriers relaxed, suggesting that climatic controls influenced the initial composition of the terrestrial faunas that persist today. So I suppose what they're saying is Pangaea was an interconnected supercontinent upon which dinosaurs had free range, but they weren't found everywhere. Instead, they remained limited to the southern hemisphere in the Carnian age, found only in India, South America, and now in Zimbabwean assemblages. They're believing this due to a paleolatitudinal barrier likely caused by climatic controls that may have manifested as an impenetrable desert or something like that. Now, who the heck is Imbirosaurus wraithii? Its name means Michael Wraith's Imbir lizard, where Imbir is a historical Shona word for the district in which the fossils were found. Michael Wraith is honored for discovering the first fossils in northern Zimbabwe. It was about 6 feet long, probably stood on 2 legs. Its small, serrated, triangle-shaped teeth suggest it was herbivorous or potentially omnivorous, and it had a relatively small head. The holotype NHMZ2222 is housed at the Natural History Museum of Zimbabwe, and it was uncovered from the pebbly Arcos Formation in Zimbabwe. It's comprised of a partial skull, the lower jaws, cervical, dorsal, sacral, and caudal vertebrae, fragments of ribs, partial pectoral and pelvic girdles, and partial forelimbs and hind limbs. Our next story here is the osteology and affinities of Eotyrannus lengi, a tyrannosauroid theropod from the Wealden supergroup of southern England. Eotyrannus received a complete anatomical description in the journal Peer J in July 2022, providing the scientific world a long overdue glimpse at what this early tyrannosaurid was like. The specimen was about 4.5 meters long, known from the interior part of its skull, a partial forelimb, its pectoral girdle, cervical, dorsal, and caudal vertebrae, rib fragments, some ilium, and hind limb elements. It was a subadult, and the paper takes the time to illustrate clearly how un-Tyrannosaurus-like it was, showing how far it was removed in the family tree from its famous great-great-grandkids, the Tyrannosaurus. While it had a similar scapulocoracoid, its snout was much shorter, its hips weren't very similar, and it didn't have the special fused ankles called arctometatarses, which made Tyrannosaurus awesome at pursuing prey over long distances. Some features that make it declaratively distinct species include differences in its dentary, in its humerus, and tibia. Now, phylogenetically, it's considered intermediate between Proceratosauridae and Eutyrannus, ultimately describing it as, and this is a mouthful, a basal, non-tyrannosaurid tyrannosauroid. The analysis does suggest that the clade Megaraptora be included within Tyrannosauroidea, which would be a bit of a phylogenetic shakeup. Including Megaraptora inside Tyrannosauroidea would significantly affect the clade's geographic range, which for a while had been considered from Asia, Australia, and South America. So think like Thailand and Japan, Patagonia, and Australia, of course. Whereas Eotyrannus is from England, so that changes the geography quite a bit. And here's where science and evidence and more fossils and anatomical descriptions help to further inform the data. Where these creatures all fit, and what that means about what we can infer about them based on their place in the phylogenetic tree remains hypothetical for this time, but lucky for us, over time, the picture will only get clearer, so exciting days are ahead. And looking ahead, now that we've covered the corrections and the dinosaur news, please welcome my special guest this week. Everybody, I'd like to welcome back Gavin Michael Booth to the show. Gavin, how you doing this morning?
Doing just fine, just fine.
Right on. So, Gavin, you'll recall, was my terrific guest a few episodes ago. He's a Canadian-born director whose film, music, video, and commercial work has been featured around the globe in theaters and on television, including collaborations with Third Eye Blind, which is really cool, NBC Universal, Sony Pictures, Blumhouse, Royal Bank of Canada, and more. We're so happy to have you back.
It's great to be here, and again, as I said last time, this is a movie that could be talked about. It's a movie in series books that could be talked about endlessly.
Yeah.
And I've had a chance to watch Dominion since Jurassic World Dominion since our last chat.
Yeah, that's right. There's hours of new original content that now exists in the Jurassic World universe that we all got to see. Do you think it was worth the wait after it was postponed? It was delayed for what, a full year because of the pandemic. We can't show this to people. Yeah, they can't go to the theater.
Unlike Top Gun Maverick, which was worth every second of waiting and somehow is just a phenomenal sequel that should not be that good, Jurassic World Dominion to me was as flat and as lame and as overbloated as I could have possibly imagined, to the point that dinosaurs weren't ever scary. I never felt anyone was in danger. It just felt like the biggest paint-by-numbers kind of script. I was thoroughly disappointed and really wished that the original cast had not signed on to come back and just sort of sully their legacy further.
I liked seeing them. I didn't know that I was going to enjoy them in that film to the degree that I did. I felt that characters seemed authentic to themselves. They didn't do anything unusual. They kind of... they reprised their roles effectively, I think, and I thought they were nice in their roles. I thought that was good. The the conversation in the tent where Laura Dern reveals that her marriage has fallen apart was so taken out of a can. It was so terrible. It's over.
Yeah, it was like almost like Hallmark level writing. Sometimes I was like, okay, yeah, we're just. I'm not a fan of movie dialogue that just says what the plot is versus like things coming up in subtext and finding more creative ways to write it,
Yeah. It was unusually like two movies in one movie, which isn't normally a recipe for success.
The locust plot was just so bizarre.
Maybe it was three movies in one movie.
Yeah. Yeah, because you had the new cast, the old cast, eventually merging. The idea, yeah, the idea of kind of like having a new Jurassic Park in this sanctuary, like it's again, most movies that I don't enjoy, especially sequels, it's like the concepts are very interesting. The execution of the concept is where I find things tend to be lacking.
Build a good story around
I will
the
just
interesting
say,
original
no offense
concept.
to him. No offense to him as a human. I love Safety Not Guaranteed. I thought Jurassic World 1 was fun. But I am so glad Colin Trevorrow did not direct Star Wars Episode 9, even though I also didn't enjoy what J.J. Abrams did with it.
And these trilogies, the two of them are seem to be connected in a way. And I don't exactly know how it is, but like when I think about trilogies, there's the kinds where you have the first trilogy concept kind of emerges where you make an excellent movie that people love, and so then you make more of them, and you put the characters that people have fallen in love with into new ideas, and the other idea is that you take an existing intellectual property that has too much content, and so then you expand that into a three movie production, which is another way to do it. Or I think Peter Jackson will take a very small short story and turn that into three movies if he can. And
Yes, the Hob again. It's where the integrity of why the sequels, or especially if they say it's a trilogy because the last one was a trilogy. It's like, does it have to be?
yeah, and
Couldn't it just be a fourth movie and done? You
and
know?
that's so interesting that you're right. Now they just say declaratively, we are going to make another trilogy. That's
Yeah.
bizarre. Like, well, I don't know. There's going to be three of them, and I think when it felt like they weren't written with the same story in mind. There wasn't an overarching sense to it all. Like there were three independent movies about the same characters, but it didn't feel like in both the Star Wars and the. I guess Star Wars is a little bit more connected, but
Yeah, like maybe their first meeting should have been, all right, where's the arc of this trilogy go?
yeah.
Let's map that out. Not paint ourselves in a corner, but let's have some sort of north star to aim towards versus just changing it up drastically each time. Yeah, I think nostalgia is great. We all get nostalgic when we see these characters, and I really think nostalgia is like it's a really powerful drug to make people like overlook or forget the bad writing and the bad plotting. Because there's like South Park has a brilliant episode about member berries, these berries that you eat that just make you nostalgic for things. Like, ooh, I remember Star Wars. Let's have more Star Wars. Like, yeah, Star Wars is great. Let's have lots more of that. Yeah, I think the nostalgia factor, for me at least, it's not good storytelling just to see the things that I like keep coming back. I think they have to be inventive. And again, Top Gun Maverick, I think one of the 10 best sequels ever made.
Okay.
And that has no right to be. I don't know if you've seen it
I
yet, but
haven't seen Top Gun
it's
though.
phenomenal. I don't even like the first Top Gun. Like I saw it like only 4 years ago. I didn't see it as growing up. I didn't have that rah rah '80s nostalgia for it. I watched it and went, I understand why this was popular. I can see how it was huge in the '80s. Not a whole lot of plot going on in this movie, and this movie defies it all. And it did like what Terminator 2 did, where arguably it's a better sequel, or The Godfather 2, or Empire Strikes Back, or Toy Story 2, and then Toy Story 3. But I think sometimes that's the distance and the patience. We're like, I'm sure in 1988 and 1990, like Tom Cruise was constantly throwing another treatment. Read this. We got a Top Gun sequel. We got a Top Gun sequel. And held out 34 years to make the right one. Or James Cameron will do a 7-year gap. Or now with Avatar 2, which that's the next one to see if like, does he actually have a story? It took 12 years to develop and do it. I'm like, I hope it's because it was all about getting the story right, not just making the CGI better.
Yes. Well, I guess Tom Cruise. What was instead of making the sequel to Top Gun, he was making sequels to. I guess that.
Mission Impossible.
Yeah, all those Mission
Yeah.
Impossibles. They never stopped making those things. I think they still have those coming out.
They're great. Yeah, there's one shooting right now, one coming out next summer. It's like a two-parter that's like supposed to be the last two chapters, but and they're all highly entertaining. They're up there with the Bond movies now in terms of how much they deliver.
That's cool. And he has to go into like traction every time he finishes filming, doesn't he? He
I
usually
mean,
breaks
I
integral
don't
parts of his
doubt
body.
it. Yeah, yeah,
Hey,
yeah.
good for him.
I think Mission Impossible Fallout, he had that ankle break when he's jumping from building to building.
Yeah.
Which is in the movie. That they kept the shot in the movie.
You have to, don't you?
I mean, I think you owe it, you owe it to somebody. If they break their body for your movie, if you can use the footage, like it
Yeah.
doesn't wreck the story, it's got to go in.
I wonder. I guess he doesn't break character when he breaks his ankle. That's unbelievable.
Yeah, he finished the shot running on a broken. But I think there's also that small window of adrenaline where you're like, I
Oh
didn't
yeah.
know, you know.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that
I
gets
didn't know it
you.
had happened yet.
You feel it the
I
next
just think,
day.
yeah, it's what shocks me about all sequels in Hollywood is like, if you're Kathleen Kennedy, if you're Universal Studios, if you're Steven Spielberg executive producing Jurassic Park sequels, don't you have the ability to like a fat king to just sit back and be like, I find me the best Jurassic Park story?
Mhm.
And could you not get 500 submissions from like all the top writers around the world in film and TV? And if you're telling me that Jurassic World Dominion was the best concept that was pitched or could have been used, I don't believe it. But at the same time, maybe I don't know. I think people just get too far away from what the core thing was. And really, did Jurassic Park ever need a sequel? It's a pretty contained story.
Yeah.
To,
Yeah.
to keep coming up with a reason that the same characters keep getting trapped and being chased by dinosaurs is a pretty limiting scope of what you can do with a story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was an excellent one shot. It is hard to expand that, and they always had trouble.
And there's some beautiful moments in there. That like Bryce Dallas Howard when she's dipping under like the lake water,
Mm-hmm.
and they do the shot moving from above underneath with her, and it's got its snout right over the water, like searching for her.
Mm-hmm.
And if she runs out of oxygen, it's game over. If she surfaces, there's some really beautiful moments in there, and some practical dinosaur effects. Like visually, it's stunning, but it's just like the story just matters too much to me to. I'm excited, and again, like the Star Wars comparison to like Andor starts this week,
Mm-hmm.
and Andor starts tomorrow, and it like I don't know something about the vibe of that. I'm just like, oh, that looks like they might have got it right. They might have done something interesting, versus just like let's bring Obi-Wan and Anakin back, and they're gonna have a rematch that we never knew about. Please stop filling in every hour of every day of what happened in the Star Wars universe.
It becomes very thorough, doesn't it? Yes.
And it's also one of the obviously we don't have Michael Crichton anymore, but I wonder if they've ever like if the publisher or anybody's ever thought like, what if we opened up the Jurassic World like novel side of things and like let people write, or an anthology book of short stories set in Jurassic Park or the Jurassic Park
Yes.
world, like does it always have to be movies? I know I haven't watched the cartoon series. People seem to really enjoy it for what it is. And there was the short film that felt more exciting than Dominion in some ways.
You make an excellent point that they're, having a series of novels that kind of explore the other sides would be very interesting. And from like, because I think there's a lot of Star Wars stuff that was produced either like I haven't seen all the animated productions that they've had, but like I feel like they take a lot of the mythology that was created in the novels. And there are a ton of novels. Star Trek did it as well, and they were able to continue to develop lots of different movies for Star Trek as well because they had these expanded universes. And you got to think that Jurassic Park is rooted in novelization. That there'd be a really interesting exercise to explore all kinds of different avenues. That you're right.
There's so much fun science, and what I was hoping for out of Dominion. Of course, they try to touch on some of it. Obviously, what's the character's name? That's it's a different actor in this film, but the one who's like the Tim Cookish Apple CEO.
Dodson, yeah.
Dodson, yeah, 'cause he's the one trying to buy the shaving cream container from what's his face
From
at the
Nedry,
beginning,
yeah.
right? From Wayne Knight in the first movie. Different actor for very nefarious reasons. But I think there's I get it. They're trying to go with modern tech, but I feel like I just feel like the first book was rooted in so much science that when you read Jurassic Park, you could believe that this was real because it felt so detailed. And even if the science wasn't like Michael Crichton was just notorious having a medical background and everything that the science just all felt so logical that you're nodding your head being like, I 100% believe that they could have brought dinosaurs back. I just feel like in a novel form, because in a movie sometimes that's very brilliant in the first movie where they use the Mr. DNA
Yeah.
to summarize it for the audience in a cartoon that takes up a minute of screen time. But I think I would enjoy reading some Jurassic Park sub story about exactly that, you know.
Yeah.
But I did like that there was almost like a, you know, they're not animals, they're dinosaurs, but like the idea of a, you know, there's activist groups and somebody's trying to have a sanctuary for them. So like, which is just perfect for mankind because at this point in the Jurassic Park world, the film world, they should have learned dinosaurs should not be on this planet anymore. This is a terrible idea that never gets any better, but human nature is still like, no, we can build a better cage system. We can all coexist. It's like we're not meant to coexist.
I think one of the shortcomings that got to me was that what was really special in the first book and really special in the first film was that the animals were unknown and they had behaviors and features that were not predicted and they're surprising and therefore dangerous. And so the intelligence of the raptors is one. I think in the book they're very clear that the Tyrannosaurus is like sensitive to the sun. It might get sunburns. Like that's one of the features that is a little bit unusual about them. The visual acuity I think was surprising to them, although I think they reneged it in the second book. But the idea that Tyrannosaurus could not see you if you didn't move was a behavior that was built into the story to make it work, and it worked well in the film and in the book. And the Dilophosaur spitting or being venomous was another surprise that was a monkey wrench in the plan. So like they say in the book, they got to redirect the Jungle River ride because a Dilophosaurus can spit at you from like a bus length away or something like that. So we can't have that. And so I love that. And then when it came to subsequent films, instead of coming up with new and interesting quirky behaviors that were surprising and fascinating, they just tried to find dinosaurs that themselves just looked weird and fascinating, and so they didn't actually build any interesting characters into the dinosaurs. They just kind of had them.
Great point.
And I
thought, really great point.
And I think there was so much more room when they do have a consultant or something like that saying, "Hey, who knows what these things were like?" They're like, maybe this thing eats fish, and you never saw that coming. Maybe it's in the water all the time. They put Dimetrodons in the water, which is a little different. I don't know. I think there's
and an interesting angle I think they've missed is like, couldn't there have ever been a scenario in these movies where like a dinosaur, when a larger predator comes along, you know, that there's got to be some dinosaur out there that might be protective of the humans or whatever it's around it from this larger predator, like something that works alongside, you know, the human characters in the movie. But I think you're right. I think it's a lot like I had it printed and framed on my wall once to remember the story comes first, because I believe it was Transformers 2, maybe 3, but there was a tweet from Michael Bay that said like, just leaving Industrial Light and Magic after, you know, a week of designing new Transformers for the movie, off to New York to start the script.
Okay.
And I was like, so you just design all the robots you want in the movie and then you force a way to fit them into a story versus building the best possible story and then designing the characters off of what you've written. And I think that's exactly what you're getting to. Like, what bigger, badder, scarier dinosaurs haven't we seen yet that we're going to put in this movie? And then it gets the mandate is, and I'm sure some of that comes down to like selling toys and merch and keeping interest in it's not just the same old dinosaurs. I think what Jurassic World did that was a great moment and nostalgia used in the right way was when the original T-Rex is still there at the park and ends up like saving the day sort of at the end. Like that was a really nice moment. But yeah, you're right. It's all about like what's cool and new without any sense of how that affects the story or could improve the story or finding ways to introduce interesting aspects about dinosaurs that they weren't aware of, since it still all is a very relatively new study. Yeah.
And I think sequels too, they have to kind of reprise what you loved about the first film, but they have to have something novel about them. There has to be something new that you haven't seen before. And I felt like the Spinosaurus was special and new. They put it in the water, and they had like that fire scene where it's like fighting the boat is insane. Yeah. The raptors being able to communicate was a neat step up. You know, they did some novel things, and through all those movies, they did really interesting stuff. Even with like less successful sequels, like the 28 Weeks Later.
Yep.
I mean, it was a totally different type of movie than the 28
Yep,
Days Later.
yep,
But they showed like things that were only kind of mentioned in the first film that maybe they didn't have the budget for, like the infection spreading through a crowd. There's an
yep.
incredible scene where they decapitate people with a helicopter, which is kind of neat. But I mean, but they did something new. They expanded on they had to show you something new. I felt like the New Dominion didn't have anything especially new in it. It felt like,
I
they
think
just
we
said,
talked about last time. Like my pitch is like take a bunch of Boy Scouts in like Yellowstone
mm-hmm,
with their scout guide and be like, oh, when I was your age, we camped over here, and some park ranger says, oh no, that's closed because we're reforesting. We need to regrow it so it's not open to the public.
mm-hmm,
And the scout leader says, nope, you're getting the experience I had. And they cross that barrier, and they go off route. They're out of cell phone connection. Nobody knows where they are because they've gone off the path.
mm-hmm.
And then because dinosaurs are in the wild, there's a T-Rex or some raptors, and just make it a monster movie where it's like a small group of people fighting for survival. Kind of, what is a good example of it's a prequel, not a sequel, but Prey that just came out, the
Yeah.
Predator movie.
Mm-hmm.
What are we going to do? Let's set it in the 1700s with a Comanche, indigenous tribe in America fighting a predator because they've been around for hundreds of years, have been visiting Earth for far longer than we ever knew.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic concept and pretty damn good execution, like really enjoyable movie. And you're just taking a fresh protagonist and putting them in the situation. You still get all your nods to the original things that people love about the Predator. You get a new design of the Predator, some new tools and tricks that the Predator has, but it doesn't wreck. If you hated Prey, it doesn't take anything away from the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a standalone thing, and I would love to see that in a Jurassic Park movie.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so hard to continuously raise the stakes and expand the impact that your story has after you've made 9 movies. Like, what's left to put at risk that you haven't solved already? But you're right.
Well, I think you can still call it Jurassic Park because you'd be in a park. You're in Yellowstone National Park. It's still about these dinosaurs from the Jurassic period, so you don't have to call it Jurassic World. Jurassic World was a brilliant touch for the name, that like kind of like we have Disneyland and then they built a bigger one called Disney World.
Okay.
Like that's a great little nod to the way that marketing would have handled that to rebrand or make it seem bigger and better. And then again, that thing with Jurassic Park that's been brilliant is the logo of the park, the name of the park is the name of the movie and the logo for the movie as well, which is just consumerism at its best. I've always loved that.
And those T-shirts all you can see them all over the place. I'm not sure. I guess you just get them at a box store, but yeah, there's all kinds of Jurassic Park T-shirts now.
There's a Jeep driving around Windsor, Ontario, Canada. That's like, it's still like whatever they use, the '93 Ford Explorer or whatever that vehicle was.
Okay.
But somebody's decked out. It's got Jurassic Park logos on the side doors. I would see a couple in Los Angeles like that all the time. So
Yeah.
it's not, I mean, obviously not. It's an iconic vehicle that's sort of like, camo beige and red Jeep. And that was like, I feel like that's when Jeep was rebranding in the 90s. And that's a great looking Jeep. That's a really fun vehicle if you're going to have a Jeep. Not as iconic as, say, the DeLorean or the Ghostbusters, like Ecto-1 Batmobile. But still, if you showed that Jeep to anybody, you'd be like, oh, I know exactly what that is.
I was just looking at a few clips of people climbing in and out of the Land Cruisers, and they are huge. Like, the amount of space, they must have been custom designed. The amount of space in the back seat for 2 adults and a third to like wiggle around and climb, it was a big interior. Like, there was I don't know if they were made special or what happened there, but there was a ton of room inside those Land Cruisers. I was astonished. And you know what? That's good, because I don't know how to get the cameras in there to like get your good shots and stuff like that. But it was a big vehicle. I was surprised to see how much space was between them. Or actors are small, one or the other. I don't know.
I don't know if you watch on YouTube. There's a channel that I follow called Corridor Crew. They're visual effects guys.
Okay.
And they do a lot of like reviewing best and worst of special effects once a week. But sometimes they create their own. And there's an episode where they use their sort of small company independent guys to recreate the T-Rex attack using models and miniatures to recreate the the attack outside of the first one where they encounter the T-Rex at the pen in the rain. It's really interesting to watch them with like today's technology try to match what only ILM could have done in 1993 using like commercial software and stuff. So, I love how much. I mean, I'm also a massive Weird Al fan. I can't wait for that movie to come out.
Yeah, that'll be something.
But his Jurassic Park song, the parody of MacArthur Park, and they did that stop motion claymation music video for it. That was, I think they only had 2 days to do it or something, and got it done. But yeah, Jurassic Park was everywhere in the zeitgeist.
Oh yeah, yeah. Speaking of special effects, I was hearing there's the scene in Die Hard where the explosion comes up the elevator shaft. I heard that they had to do some incredibly difficult things to get that to work for the shot. Like I heard, yeah. So in terms of like trying to recreate or understand how some of these practical effects are produced in the before days, it's just fascinating.
Well, it's interesting too, because I don't know if you've had a chance to watch the Disney Plus 6-part series Light and Magic.
Yeah, not yet, but I should. Yeah,
it's it's the whole history of industrial light and magic from the birth of the scrappy ragtag team that did the original Star Wars, all the way through. But like I feel like I've watched the making of Jurassic Park a million times. I know who Steven Spaz Williams is, that invented the T-Rex model run that blew everyone's mind. Phil Tippett, famously being told like, I'm out of a job. Don't you mean extinct? Like that made it into the movie. All of that, but this documentary, there's still more chapters and layers to it when they actually get all of the individual interviews with people from ILM to talk about how it came to be. Of like, he knew that Kathleen Kennedy and Frank Marshall and Spielberg would walk in this like door and entrance, so he put a TV, strategically placed a TV, because they were told, stop with this animation thing, we're doing it stop motion, the decision has been made. And just like a rebel, put the TV with the skeletal cycle, the run cycle he had computer animated, so he knew that they would see it in the office and be like, what is this? You know? And they talk about the moment that they all sat in a cinema, even like people who were just office managers for Industrial Light and Magic that weren't special effects people. They talk about sitting in this screening room when they first showed the T-Rex with the skin on it, and that everything was good. They talk about how just like they'll never forget, like that moment in time is for them. They're like, everything changed in special effects immediately, and I knew I was witnessing history when I watched this piece of film running.
That's so fascinating.
Pretty incredible. So it's always interesting to me that 30 years later, there's still new, or even like, God, that Beatles documentary came out, the Get Back. Like, how can it be 50 something years later and there's still new information and new footage we haven't seen before? And you get episodes like How Did This Get Made? Not How Did This Get Made, that's the comedy podcast. The Movies That Made Us on Netflix with Jurassic Park. And again, I've heard all these stories, I've read all the books. I had the Making of Jurassic Park, like coffee table book growing up. I bought the separate VHS of the Making of Jurassic Park with the half-hour featurette before DVDs were a thing. And you think you know it all, but there's just always animals angles and new stories to it.
So speaking of like practical effects in ILM, for a phrase, we call them puppets, but I mean the animatronics kind of get a mature name instead of just calling them puppets. But working with animatronics or puppets must be an entirely different challenge. Is that anything that you've worked with before? Have you put puppets into anything yet?
We made a movie called The Scarehouse that was set inside of Windsor's like Halloween attraction called Scarehouse Windsor, and I do the marketing videos for them. One of my dear friends, Sean Lippert and Dario Salvaggi, own it. So I help create their marketing videos, and I'm actually shooting a documentary TV series about what it's like to own and operate a haunted house as a business. So I say all that because they have some hydraulic scares in there. There's some sort of just like kind of like a monster head that pops out of a hole at one point with the jaws, but it's just connected to almost like bicycle handles.
Okay.
And just somebody behind the scenes in the dark is physically pushing that out at you. And when they twist one handle, the jaws are opening, and when they twist the other one, it's got the sound effects for the voice and the lights in the eyes. So like very basic kind of stuff, but so in terms of trying to film that and make it look like a good scare. It's just learning how to puppeteer a little bit. I had a puppet music video that I wanted to do. It's still an idea that I love. I just haven't found the right band to execute it with. But yeah, not a lot of puppet work on my resume.
Well, being a fan of things like Star Wars, that like getting Yoda to perform emotional moments and taking like important beats is a masterclass in making that goofy puppet mean something. Like,
because that could have been a disaster, especially when you hire the team behind the Muppets to do it,
yeah.
right? But like Yoda today, they shot that in 79, released in 80. Yoda today, watching that movie, still looks as lifelike as when I was whatever age old when I watched that movie. You're when you're a kid, everything, because even like you watch Labyrinth, and as a kid you're like, wow. You watch it now, you're like, some of these are clearly puppets on rods. They don't have the same sort of thing. Or even in The Force Awakens and some of the later movies, like the mouth, or God, the prequels of the Neimoidians, the Trade Federation people, where the mouths, just for all the advancements in technology, the mouths do not match the actors. And it's so phony. But Yoda, you're right, is so emotional, so much gravitas to that performance. And you got one person on a radio control working his eyes, and then you've got Frank Oz doing the hand movement to the voice, and it's phenomenal work to make that come. And I think that's really the magic of cinema, right? Is when you that that's not real, but especially practically, people were able to, or the Jabba the Hutt puppet, where you've got three guys inside him, plus people controlling the eyes, plus people controlling other things, and just that. It's almost like a dance choreography team at that point, right? Where everybody's got to kind of do their part to make it all come to life. And if one of them's even off a little bit, it's just the illusion is broken.
I think I'm going to butcher this story, but I think when Dominion was coming out, there was a bunch of specials maybe, that had the cast chatting about their experiences in the past and on the new film. And there was one part where Sam Neill was discussing how when he first approached the sick Triceratops, that he was moved by it as well, that it was like enough, a convincing puppet, that it really surprised him. And then they get up close to it and they look at it, and then he said, then 5 guys climbed out its butt. And you're right, it destroys the illusion real quick, but the puppets are something. And that scene in the film with the Triceratops is so special that it's really your first chance to get up close to one of the animals, so they have to be really convincing. And it's something, you can't do. I don't think you could have done it with CGI, because interacting with it is a real gift. Maybe in these days, in movie making,
they would have especially the scene where he lays on its belly as it breathes. He's just fascinated to feel the heart, the heartbeat in a living dinosaur. You would have had to have a blue screen or a green screen, almost like air sac or something.
Yeah.
Somebody's like, you could do it, but it doesn't look as good as the way the scaling, the sunlight's hitting the scaling, and just just know that everything's tactile and part of it, or the way that sometimes it's a combo thing where they could have built the belly and the airbag behind it practical, and then the rest of the dinosaur could have been CG around just that belly piece. But yeah, that's a scene where, and just the fact that this animal's in pain and you feel for it, and you just get that connection that all living creatures have the ability to look out for one another and take care of each other. You're right, it's such a great, because correct me if I'm wrong, but in the book and the film, they've seen the Brontosaurus from afar, which is that amazing coming out of the Jeep and the sunglasses coming off and the Spielberg mouth open thing that he does in every movie. The wonderment eyes. It is that Triceratops is the first time they see another dinosaur and actually get to touch a dinosaur. Yeah.
I think, and Sam Neill had another little tidbit. He says when he climbs up the roof of the Jeep, he takes his sunglasses off to look at the dinosaur, and he goes, which was stupid, but I had to do something. But you don't take your sunglasses off to see it better. But and then I think he said, Laura Dern said afterwards, I just copied what you did.
Well, I think it's the you can see it, but when you see something like that, you really want to see it with your own eyes.
That's right.
That expression, right? Yeah.
Well, I thought it was a convincing performance. I didn't see a problem with it, but in the back of his head, it always bothered him that that it didn't make sense to him to take your glasses off to see it better.
Which something I've never noticed, but they talk about his accent changing in that movie and having him like drop his American accent that he started.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never once felt that there's two different
Mm-hmm.
tones to his voice or accent. So, but again, maybe I need to watch it again and focus on that and see if I spot it.
I think it was good. It's certainly, I know that there's a great tradition now in getting very British actors to portray Southern accents, Southern American accents. And I'm glad that, I don't know, I was convinced with his performance. His voice kind of does have maybe it's something theatrical, about it. There's something that kind of rolls around in the lower register in his performance, which may be him fighting back that New Zealand, whatever you call that accent, but...
Listen, it's an Oscar-worthy accent in comparison to, say, Kevin Costner in Robin Hood and Prince of Thieves, or, God bless him, but Keanu Reeves in Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Okay.
Trying to do a British accent. That was a big ask that somebody should have rethought. Yeah.
Yes. In choosing your thespians, it must be wise.
Tell me, Lord Dracula, why exactly do you want to have dinner with the Countess? Yeah. Whoa. Yeah.
Do you consider motion capture suits puppets? Would they count?
It's kind of like it's human puppets in a sense, right?
Well, there's always a human.
What do you think about? I guess the best example of that would be like the apes in Planet of the Apes, right? Where they're do they do any human performance capture for the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park?
I think the raptors in Jurassic Park 3 may have been. I don't.
They probably would have put people in like some kind of stilts that gave them the leg position and just try to.
Or maybe Jurassic World. I think I saw something like that, but maybe not Jurassic Park 3. I think Jurassic Park 3. I've seen people in costumes where they're like walking on stilts to give you like the feet. So like this guy's in this weird chassis as he's walking around to get the feet walking on the ground.
It's puppeteering to a degree. It's a human using their body in different ways to create almost like a digital puppet that's can then be further manipulated with sort of invisible strings inside the computer. I always laugh at the Hobbit Desolation of Smog, that footage of Benedict Cumberbatch like rolling around on the floor and like motion capturing the dragon. I'm like, dude, they can animate a dragon. They need your face capture, yes, maybe. They don't need you slithering around the floor and they're expending, their $10,000 motion capture suit to animate a dragon. And I often laugh. I'm just like, I bet you he only did that because the behind the scenes camera was there that day, but for the rest of the time he's just like sat in a chair perfectly framed with his sensors on his face. You look at the side by sides of like Andy Serkis as Gollum when they do the side by sides, or the apes in Planet of the Apes prequels, just phenomenal like motion capture work, and you can see how it becomes the performance. Yeah. And everyone's always like, they have to have a motion capture Oscar category, and I'm like, not yet, because even though they're capturing all that detail, the animators are still vastly tweaking and perfecting and putting their own spin on it. So it's not a full motion capture yet. My wife in her acting career, she was in Far Cry 5 playing a character.
Oh, right on.
And like obviously the video game is a little more kind of stilted and everything, but it's still really interesting that like actors are playing the characters in video games and getting to do the motion capture for it.
Yeah, I've seen some of the behind the scenes stuff on like Grand Theft Auto 5, and I was like, wow, I'm really blown away that like they got legit actors to record all of that stuff, because that's no short gig.
Yeah, our friend Kimberly Sue Murray is another Toronto-based actor. She was in our film Scarehouse, but she's Gamora in the Guardians of the Galaxy video game that came out last year too, or earlier this year, whenever it was. But yeah, just phenomenal time with. And video games are interesting too, because there's so much more to do than a traditional film script, because some of those scripts are hundreds and hundreds of pages long, because of all the variations and branches of storytelling in video games.
So, did I see you just had an announcement that one of your films just got put into a new festival, got accepted into a festival?
Yeah, there's a film that I directed and edited called Artifice. It's a collective of 8 actors that all star in the film. they're working actors in Toronto, and the real trick in the last 10 years has become, if you want to accelerate your career, write and produce your own stuff. Like, just keep creating your own work instead of waiting for casting directors to come to you. So they wrote it together. They specifically that they could all act in it and produced it, and graciously sought me out to see if I'd be interested in directing. And we finished it a while ago, but kind of been waiting. Same thing as like not as important as the multi-million-dollar Hollywood feature, but kind of waiting till the pandemic had subsided and we could go to theaters and not have to do virtual festivals. So it's going to be premiering in Chatham at the Chatham-Kent International Film Festival, and then starts its festival run from there. And then I'll be in London, Ontario, at the Forest City Film Festival around the 20th of October. I actually have 3 other short films that are all playing at that festival.
Wow.
Like trifecta. I was like, cool. Yeah, definitely got to go.
So things have opened up now. You don't have to, like, cross-border traffic isn't so. I mean, for the last few years, it must have been such a problem.
Yeah, I've only sparingly been across the border, but I've knock on wood, I've had a handful of flights, but haven't suffered the the atrocities of Pearson Airport in Toronto that the rest of the globe is complaining about. Not yet. So.
But like getting down to LA, have you been able to do that yet?
I was there in June.
Right.
I was on the jury for Dances with Film Festival, and ironically, I had to go all the way back to LA to catch COVID because I got COVID while I was there and spent the majority of my trip isolated in the hotel room.
That's just rotten.
No, I got a pretty relaxed perspective on things. It didn't kill me. It's killed other people. Whatever, if I had to sit in a hotel for 7 days and binge a TV show, I'm fine.
Yeah.
I can handle that.
I got through 2 seasons of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. when I got it. Just.
Well, then there you go. Here's the tie-in. Then you probably saw an episode with actor Ryan Powers guest starring, who is the lead actor and writer of one of the shorts playing in London called In These Parts.
Oh, right on.
There you go.
Okay.
He was just on She-Hulk last week too. So. Yeah.
Okay, I would recognize him then, maybe. I'm sure.
Did you watch She-Hulk?
I just caught up on that this weekend. Yeah.
So he plays the douchebag date that she goes on through the app.
Okay.
Just bragging about how he was banned from Winnipeg, Canada. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's too funny. I hope he doesn't get typecast. Not that there isn't a shortage of roles.
What's interesting about Ryan is Ryan, was also my neighbor in Los Angeles, and the short film that we made together was just out of like wanting to work together and create. But I can honestly say each time I've seen a few of his previous short films, and he produced and wrote and starred in a web series, and everything I've ever seen him in, like really is completely different.
Cool.
I'm constantly surprised. Even watching She-Hulk, I was like, completely different side of Ryan's acting I hadn't seen before, which is fun, especially when you know people in real life and then you get to see their body of acting work and like, man, they're good actors because you just know it's not who they are in real life. Yeah.
That's really cool. Well, I know that we just had, and by we I mean I guess I live close enough to Toronto, that the Toronto International Film Festival just wrapped up, and it's been interesting to see what kind of things get a buzz coming out of it. Like there has to be a story that day about what's going on, and there's been a lot of so did you hear about the People's Joker?
I heard that they tried to pull it, but then it did screen.
So they had, obviously they had some licensing issues where they didn't make this little film with the blessings of DC Comics or whomever owns the license for it.
It's about the Joker?
So it's kind of, I don't know, it's from what I read, I think it's a story of somebody coming to terms with their identity as a trans person, set against the motif of everything is like in Gotham. And they are, I don't know exactly how it plays out, but yeah, they are the Joker. Like the whole deal. So purple jacket, green hair.
I thought it was just the distributor had decided to not show it there either, because sometimes they don't want early reviews before they put a movie out, or they have different plans for it where a festival premiere they feel would alter their marketing approach. But I'll have to look into that more. I definitely caught the headlines and thought I understood it. There's a few Friends films were playing there this year. The End of Sex, written by Jonas Chernick, that I'm excited to see because that's playing at London at the festival I'm at, so I'm hoping to catch it there. And and then Spielberg took audience choice with audience favorite with The Fablemans, which is, again, I don't know much about it, but it's like loosely inspired by his own life of growing up and falling in love with cinema.
Okay, that'd be a cool
And
one.
people seem to love it and gave it glowing reviews. And I don't think we've really had like a schmaltzy Spielberg, kid driven movie in some time. I know he did make The Big Friendly Giant, but oof. And obviously the Tintin movie, which I enjoyed, that motion capture movie, but it'll be nice to see him back, sort of, I feel like, doing what Spielberg does best.
Yeah, that's cool. And I know that I guess Brendan Fraser is in something called The Whale, which I don't know much about, but he got a ton of buzz for that. And it, like, I don't know if he's sick or what, but like people were like really emotional about Brendan Fraser, which I mean, he's a good dude, but people are really gushing about him.
Somebody was just telling me the other day a story about him that, like, somebody who was the president of the Golden Globes at the time, like had grabbed him either in the crotch or grabbed his butt, and he asked for an apology, and the person wouldn't give him an apology, and then he was never invited back to the Golden Globes.
Okay.
And it's sort of a thing where there's all these Harvey Weinstein, obviously being the head of that devil community of abuse of power, but essentially he kind of like got pushed out of Hollywood.
Okay.
By this one person, this one incident. So he's sort of like, he's had trouble with relationships. He put on a lot of weight. He didn't work much. So I think this is like his John Travolta comeback moment.
Okay.
And I think it's one of those things where people are like, wow, his performance is so outstanding in this movie, because it's the Darren Aronofsky movie, right?
I believe so, yeah.
And Sadie Sink is in it. I recently had a chance to co-edit a film that she's in, called Dear Zoe. But yeah, it's phenomenal. I think it's about the performance. I hope he's not sick.
Yeah, well, maybe there's that underlying heroism that people are appreciating as well. That he stood up for something that was bigger than him, maybe he didn't win. But I think maybe there's
it's almost
some
like
credit to him.
Not that acting is as physical sometimes as, say, UFC or boxing or any sports thing, but everybody loves a comeback story, right? There's like to kind of get kicked in the face and knocked down or battle any kind of addiction or anything and come back. It's something that Hollywood and the press and audience seem to appreciate. But he looks transformative in that fat suit in that movie, so I'm excited to. I mean, Aronofsky's just one of those guys where whatever he makes, I'll watch, because he, even at what I feel is his worst movie, is generally far more interesting than most of the movies that come out.
If Brendan Fraser could be anybody in any movie of Jurassic Park, where would you have put him?
Oh man,
because he'd be fun. He'd be because he does physical. He runs around. He's goofy. He doesn't take things too seriously.
Probably like maybe Chris Pratt's character in Jurassic World.
Yeah.
Could have had that same thing.
He could have done the Vince Vaughn one easy. I think he could have been Nick Van Owen or whatever.
You're right, because that's 97. So Brendan Fraser broke out in like 92 with School Ties. Well, Encino Man in 19.
Yeah, he could have been Encino Man too, and they could have cloned a caveman.
Yeah, exactly. You could have had him. He could have just been in the.
He was on the exhibit.
Just picking berries.
Doug.
There you go. Encino Man versus the dinosaurs at Jurassic Park.
Oh, he could have been there. Yeah, that would have been the perfect trope of getting everything wrong, putting cavemen and dinosaurs back together.
And he's got to save Pauly Shore because he bought the wrong ticket and wandered into the wrong part of the park. Because what was his big break after that? So he does School Ties in 92. I forget what.
Encino Man was big.
Encino Man was huge.
Yeah.
Oh, there was like Blast from the Past around the same time with the one with Christopher Walken where they're in
Yeah.
the bomb shelter since the '60s and come up and don't realize that bomb never went off.
Well, he was huge in the Mummies, wasn't he? Or at least one
The
of them.
Duh, of course, yeah, 1999, The Mummy.
Okay.
Yeah, that was his big, yeah, and there you go. Maybe that's where I'm relaying like the adventurer.
You can
Chris
picture him
Pratt
doing it,
kind of,
yeah.
kind of thing, yeah, because that was very Indiana Jones esque and.
I
Yeah,
think
somewhere in there. He'd have to be an outdoorsman. He wouldn't be Ian Malcolm. He wouldn't be Sam Neill. Like, and not to say that his acting couldn't do those things. Knowing the things he's done, he'd fit more in that kind of adventurer role.
you know what? He is in Looney Tunes Back in Action, which one of my kids watches too much, and he and I think it's Jenna Elfman are very good in it. But I mean, they got to do the whole Who Framed Roger Rabbit acting against Looney Tunes. But
He was in Paul Haggis's Crash as well, wasn't he?
was he?
Brendan Fraser.
Was
I
that
think he
the?
was in like 2005 or whenever that movie came out.
Okay. I'm trying to picture.
Yeah, The Whale I want to see. I'm more and more these days. I try to like tomorrow night. I'm going to buy a ticket to. There's a movie out in cinemas called The Barbarian,
Mm-hmm.
or just Barbarian. All I've heard is from like 6 friends are like they loved it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what it's about. I don't know who's in it. I don't know who made it. I'm gonna just blindly go in. And I try to do that more. I try to watch very
Okay.
few trailers, or read too much about things, or read reviews in advance. I just want to be surprised, which is so rare these days because it's impossible to
Right.
avoid movie news with the internet.
Yeah, Barbarian is a promoted tweet that I keep saying now. I don't know what it's about either.
Maybe that's what sold me on it too. Maybe I just keep seeing it.
That'd be cool. In terms of marketing a film, like there's a lot more to it. And when you're making your own projects and stuff like that, it has to be a tremendous amount of effort to have to do the fundraising for yourself and do your own writing and then do your own casting and do your own directing and storyboards and all the ideas and then the marketing afterwards. How do you what are some of the strategies that have worked for you, especially on a smaller budget than being able to do like a press junket?
It's funny. I actually teach like a workshop that I usually travel to film festivals for, called "If You Build It, They Won't Come." I'm sort of paraphrasing the famous Field of Dreams quote. And I understand it. Most people are making their first movie for like 25,000, 50,000, maybe 100,000. And all of that money is like, we are going to barely cross the finish line to finish the product. And then, you might sign a distribution deal. The distribution side of filmmaking it's evil. There's no kind of word for it. There's no way to soften the blow. It's a lot of distributors in the indie space are over promising. Oh, we're going to get it out here and on Netflix, and we'll get you an Entertainment Weekly. And they don't have to live up to any of that. They just get to sell you all that, so you sign the contract. And generally speaking, they might get you a couple reviews. They might get you one article on some scotsmovietalk.com, some website you've never heard of, which is all good. There's no such thing as bad press, but it's a lot of filmmakers are left hanging. The product comes out, and then there's only so much precious time that you can build back or try to get on there. So I've been teaching this course about how to do some zero budget marketing or very low budget marketing, and it's a bunch of stuff. But I've always had a bit of a marketing side to my brain. So like for Scarehouse, for example, when we had our world premiere, which was here in Windsor, we sold just shy of 1,000 tickets. We were on 5 screens at one time in a multiplex. But that night, the cast of 8 actresses that were in the film, they were all they're all dolled up, ready to go to their red carpet premiere. We said, hey, there's a limo coming. We're gonna go do some press interviews, and then we'll come back to the premiere. And we drove them to the haunted house where we shot the movie, which was open for the Halloween season at the time, and said everyone has to go through this, preferably alone, and you don't get to go to the premiere unless you go. And then we had infrared camera operators inside there to film.
Oh, cool.
Could the cast of the Scarehouse survive a haunted house? And bleep out all the swearing. And we teamed up with a YouTube channel that had a much larger viewership that premiered that prank video. And we've always put the soundtracks out, and we make behind the scenes videos and podcasts nowadays. The last 5 years, like I reach out to every indie filmmaking podcast I can find and say, hey, if I'd ever fit to be a guest, would love to talk about the movie. Reaching out to in the letterbox sort of community and Twitter reviewers. I think it's just all very basic, and it's very boring. It's very grueling. It's a lot of follow up emails and things. It's just having the tenacity to make sure that people are going to see your movie. And for me, I feel like I have to know that I didn't leave anything on the table. I tried everything that I could that cost nothing or a low amount of money. Social media, obviously, but I think a lot of people fall into the trap of like, oh, I posted about it twice on my Facebook. Everyone knows this movie is out there. And it's like, no, it's not the way it goes. So it's just a game of sort of everything that you can do. But for me, it's the blessing of being my own editor is I can edit new commercials, I can edit new trailers, I can take the behind the scenes footage and get a quick little interview with the cast or the crew and tell a little story, and then just plug that into wherever it makes sense out there. If you can offer a website, hey, we've got an exclusive clip from the movie, there's a better chance of them featuring your indie movie than,
Right on. So you do the own editing too. That's amazing stuff. We were just watching Tommy Boy, and the pacing was so fast. We got through the first act and getting into the direction of things, and I was like, wow, I don't remember this movie moving so quickly. He graduates, he gets to work, he gets his first office. They tell 13 jokes. It was unbelievable how fast that movie moved, because it was such a goofy film. But your editing makes a big difference. You mentioned that the Chatham-Kent
Film
Festival is so you're nominated for editing, which is pretty, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's fun. I not all festivals have awards. Not all festivals tell you like the nominations in advance. So that's always flattered. This movie in particular is actually, it's like an anthology inside of a short. It's 5 different stories about this technology company. Each story is another 10 years into the future of where this sort of app is leading us, almost in a Black Mirror-esque way, where it's not good. The future is not good in a lot of ways with tech. But we shot it. It was planned to be, it would be like story 1 for 5 minutes, story 2, very linear. But in editing, I ended up, convincing and discussing with the producer, saying, I think there's a way to like intermingle these 5 stories in the edit and be constantly cutting back and forth between them. And that's the way we ended up presenting the movie and ultimately falling in love with it. So being nominated to edit that versus anything else, I'm happy about, because the editing in this one truly reshaped the story and is as integral to my directed. The editing in this is synonymous with my directing, because I was really directing the edit to kind of reshape the story. And they don't know that. They don't get to know, they don't know that's what it was. It means so much to me that somebody looked at it and went, oh, the editing in this is really interesting. That should be considered. Yeah.
That's really, really cool. Well, looks like we're out of time all over again.
It happens.
Yeah. Thanks so much for coming back.
Of course.
Lots of luck in Chatham-Kent. That's going to be amazing. I'm sure we'll hear all about it. And London.
Yeah, listen, the Ontario festivals are great. It's a great way to meet a bunch of regional filmmakers that I hopefully can collaborate with some of them, and just support regional festivals. As all of these festivals grow, it's so exciting to just be a small part of it and be a champion, so that they get to continue and offer all of us indie filmmakers a voice and a place to screen our movies.
Well, thank you so much again. I really, really appreciate you having come back and sharing all your passion about the movies.
Like I said, this is a movie and a story. It's one of my all-time favorites. Could chat about it forever,
Right on. Me too. Well, thanks again. Let's get into our chapter for today. This week's text is Stegosaur, spanning from pages 154 to 157. In a synopsis, the tour continues to the Stegosaurus paddock, where the vet is tending to a sick stego, which Grant rushes to inspect. The stegos are, quote, always getting sick, but Sattler cracks the case. While consuming gizzard stones, the stegos were inadvertently also consuming toxic berries, explaining why there is no trace of the West Indian lilac bushes being eaten, nor in the stego spores. Because it's not the plants, it's the berries. They find this evidence in a discarded pile of gizzard stones, as well as something else even more shocking. Meanwhile, Gennaro quizzes Malcolm on why Chaos Theory predicts that Jurassic Park is unsafe for people, or put differently, will have, quote, very large consequences for human life. Animal welfare and animal containment are predicted to fail at Jurassic Park, and no sooner has he said that, Grant and Ellie reveal their consequential discovery, a raptor eggshell, proving that dinosaurs are breeding in Jurassic Park. Characters: Ellie Sattler. Ellie speaks with Tim when he starts asking questions on page 154, and she recognizes the, quote, peculiar odor like rotting fish on 155, and relates with Lex over the ill Stego. She identifies the tongue blisters as microvesicles, just like in the movie. She picks at blisters with her fingernail, revealing a clear liquid. She sets her mind to diagnosing what's causing the Stegosaur illness. Their constant foraging precludes the source of illness from their diet, she hypothesizes. She calls the illness, quote, poisoning on 155, that they'd constantly be sick if they were eating a toxic plant, she surmises. She spots that the pupils are dilated, not constricted as would be expected from the tranquilizer, a pharmacological effect. Sattler identifies the toxic West Indian lilac bushes and suspects it may be the poisonous culprit on 156. Sattler reveals all the Stegosaur symptoms are consistent with meliotoxicity, stupor, blistering of the mucous membranes, and pupillary dilation, but the plants show no sign of being eaten. Quote, none at all, on page 156. Sattler walks further into the field to investigate. She wonders if the berries, though terribly bitter, could be what the Stegosaurs are eating. What with the plants showing no signs of being eaten, though? Why would the Stegos eat them? She misidentifies the gizzard stones as weathered rocks from the surf on page 157, but realizes what they are while talking to Grant. Ian Malcolm. Malcolm thinks the Stegosaur is, quote, funny looking on 154. He discusses his predictions with Gennaro on 158, and he continues to be the doomsayer, arguing that the mathematics lead to the conclusion, quote, very large consequences for human life. He deflects from his personality and ego, instead suggesting that he did the math and the outcome is good, or rather, the predictions from the math are viable. You can take them to the bank. But it's easy to dislike Malcolm. He quickly expands conversations beyond the realm of comprehension, and while he makes the effort to be relatable, he's constantly controlling conversations as the gatekeeper of information. It's easy to see why he's disliked. He evokes Gödel, Heisenberg, Newton, and John von Neumann, recapping the history of science to make his argument, which shows how this concept of chaos theory is turning the scientific field on its ear, but also commands much from his audience. Quote, it's astonishing how few people care to hear it, Malcolm says. Quote, I gave all this information to Hammond long before he broke ground on this place. You're going to engineer a bunch of prehistoric animals and set them up on an island? Fine. Lovely dream. Charming. But it won't go as planned. It is inherently unpredictable, just as the weather is, he says on 159. Malcolm predicted specific areas where deviations would occur. The fitness of the animals to the environment was one area, thus predicting the Stegosaur's routine illness. The ability of the park to control the spread of life forms was another. And here we get one of Malcolm's famous lines. Broadly speaking, the ability of the park to control the spread of life forms. Because the history of evolution is that life escapes all barriers. Life breaks free. Life expands to new territories, painfully, perhaps even dangerously, but life finds a way. Malcolm shakes his head. I don't mean to be philosophical, but there it is. Just like in the film, right? Dr. Harding. He carries a flashlight to inspect the Stegos' mouth, we see on 155. He has a difficult time with the Stegos. They're always getting sick. Well versed in the illness's symptoms and the Stegosaur feeding patterns, Dr. Harding expects the effects of the tranquilizer to be meiotic pupillary constrictions, but instead the pupils are dilated. I'll be damned, he says, identifying the pharmacological effect. Spielberg made sure Dr. Harding said, I'll be damned in the movie, too. Gotta represent Dr. Harding on the screen, eh? Harding knows the West Indian lilac is toxic, but attests that the animals don't eat it. He's watched the animals feeding and inspected their spores. The Stegosaurs, quote, never eat the lilac bushes. He reiterates, quote, they don't eat it. Harding also refutes that the eggshell is a dinosaur egg, because he believes, nay, he knows that, quote, the dinosaurs can't breed, he says on 160. Denying the egg suggests that Harding refutes ideas and observations that don't jive with his work, which is probably explaining how it is that he's overlooked so many things in the park, because there are a load of things that he should have noticed. Ed Regis. Regis continues to be the tour guide introducing the veterinarian, but not the dinosaurs, on page 154. He immediately uses the Stegosaur's nickname, Stego. Lex. Lex is worried that the sickness may be contagious, on 154. Lex wrinkles her nose, complaining that the Stegosaur is, quote, smelly, on 155. Usually a complainer, Lex opens up with Sattler, becoming more inquisitive about the dinosaur and its illness. She says, ugh, at the broken blisters, on 155. The Stegosaur mystery bores Lex. After a while, she inquires if anyone wants to play, quote, a little pickle, to entertain her. She plays pickle with Gennaro. She's too rough with Gennaro, though, and she calls him a wimp, on 158. She likes it when he puts a little something on his next throw, though. Dr. Grant. Without a word, he hurries from the Land Cruiser over to the Stegosaurus right away, on page 154, peering into its mouth. Grant calls Ellie to inspect the tongue with very fine silvery blisters. Grant catches up to Sattler during her investigation and agrees with her gizzard stone hypothesis on page 157, and he serves as a scientific sounding board providing a paleontological insight, if unspoken, into the text. While inspecting the discard pile, he spots something. Tim's inquisitive, wondering what the Stego is sick with. He shushes Lex when she gets impatient and bored on 156 while supporting their scientific inquiry to the sick Stego. Donald Gennaro, he plays Pickle with Lex to help her pass the time during the Stegosaur illness mystery on 157. She throws so hard it hurts his hand, and he asks her to be more gentle on 158. She calls him a wimp, and he is annoyed enough that he throws it back at her harder than he probably should have, resulting in a satisfying smack in the glove. Gennaro continues his investigation with Malcolm about his predictions for Jurassic Park's failure. Gennaro feels like Malcolm is a bit of a fraud, questioning, quote, is anything not predicted by your theory on 158? Feeling like Malcolm only predicts things after they've happened, it's nice to see that Malcolm does predict the next deviation beforehand. Their systems to control the animals will fail. Gennaro does well to consume great amounts of information through this chapter, and all through the book, really. If nothing else, he's a great researcher and asks good questions, and probably is a very good listener, too. Stegosaurus. The Stegosaurus is quiet and still, until Malcolm, quote, funny looking, on 154. It's 20 feet long, a huge, bulky body, and leathery, vertical armor plates along its spine. The tail had dangerous-looking 3-foot spikes, but the neck tapered to an absurdly small head with a stupid gaze, like a very dumb horse. It smells, we're told on 155. They eat 500 to 600 pounds daily and are constant foragers. It has a range of about 5 square miles, on page 156 we're told, mostly north of where they're presently standing. They make a slow loop through their home range, feeding as they go, completing the loop in about a week. Stegosaurs swallow gizzard stones, which collect in a muscular pouch in the digestive tract, then help crush tough plant food before it reaches the stomach. Once worn smooth, the stones are regurgitated. The Stegosaur is sick, so its armored plates droop slightly. It breathes slowly, laboriously, making a wet sound with each breath. It has a, quote, peculiar odor, like, quote, rotting fish. Its purple tongue droops limply from its mouth. Harding says the Stegos are, quote, always getting sick. The blisters exude a clear liquid. Symptoms include imbalance, disorientation, labored breathing, and massive diarrhea. Happens every 6 weeks or so. Massive diarrhea? Massive. This expression has become so cliche. Can't there be some other adjective for it? Explosive is a little too comedic, and even that's getting a little tired too. Why not something alliterative, like devastating diarrhea, decentralized diarrhea? Degenerate diarrhea? If it's recurring, it could be deja vu diarrhea, deleterious, but I like this one, deliquesce, meaning to become liquid. Deliquesce diarrhea, that's what I'm talking about. Let's get that to become cliche instead of massive diarrhea, please. And that wraps up this week's Scat Chat on the Jurassic Park-Cast. Localities. The South Fields. Due to volcanic activity at the southern end of Isla Nublar, plumes of steam rise from the ground, we're told on 154. An open meadow with scattered rocky outcrops. There are intermittent plumes of steam rising from the ground. The ground is rocky in many places, and the surf can be heard in the distance. There are berries among the rocks, and apparently it's about 5 square miles. Illusions. Play a little pickle? Pickle is a schoolyard game where someone runs between 2 bases trying not to get tagged out. But I guess it also just means to, play catch as well. Gödel's theorem. Kurt Gödel is referred to as Gödel. Gödel's theorem is invoked by Malcolm to explain chaos theory. The mathematics imply very large consequences for human life, greater than Gödel's incompleteness theorems, which use mathematical logic concerning the limits of provability in formal axiomatic theories. Some things seem self-evidently true, but how can we use math to prove that they are true? Gödel's theorem suggests that finding the underpinning truth behind mathematics is impossible. First, no consistent system of truths, whose theorems can be listed by any effective procedure, is capable of proving all truths about arithmetic or natural numbers. Apparently, says the theorem. While a system can make true statements, the system itself cannot prove that the statements are true or that statements are unprovable. Therefore, the system cannot demonstrate its own consistency. Malcolm considers Gödel's theorems a philosophical and academic problem, whereas chaos theory takes those uncertainties and applies them in the real world. Malcolm evokes Goodell again to illustrate that science was once believed to offer a true vision for the world around us, and that, with a scientific understanding, it offers total control. However, Heisenberg's principle and Goodell's theorem both illustrate that this scientific, quote, truth is unattainable. Not only that the subatomic world is limited in what we can know, but also that the language of mathematics, the language of science, has an innate trueness to it, but that's flawed as well. Heisenberg's principle. Heisenberg is evoked by Malcolm as well on page 158, suggesting that chaos theory implies very large consequences for human life. Much larger than Heisenberg's principle, Malcolm feels this principle is academic, philosophical, whereas chaos theory concerns everyday life. Malcolm again evokes Heisenberg while elaborating on chaos theory. Science was hoped to give mankind control of the world, but Heisenberg's uncertainty principles set limits on what can be known about the subatomic world, that things cannot be known definitely, that things are always uncertain. And chaos theory proves that unpredictability is built into our daily lives. This refers to Werner Heisenberg's uncertainty principle in quantum mechanics, which sets a limit to the accuracy with which the values of certain pairs of physical quantities of a particle, such as position, x, and momentum, p, can be predicted from initial conditions. We have John von Neumann, a mathematician, physicist, computer scientist, and polymath. He died at the young age of 54, but he's known for integrating pure and applied sciences, and is referenced in Jurassic Park as a mathematician who adopted computers to calculate the impacts of many variables in a formula for weather forecasting. Malcolm evokes von Neumann in his work on weather forecasting and predictability, and how science is based on the belief that, quote, if you knew enough, you could predict anything. We're told on 158. Sir Isaac Newton, heralded by Malcolm as one of the first scientists publishing works on mathematics in the 1660s, that all science beginning with Newton operated believing that, quote, if you knew enough, you could predict anything. Later, Malcolm suggests that since the days of Newton and Descartes, science has explicitly offered us the vision of total control and, quote, claimed the power to eventually control everything through its understanding of natural laws. Put all this together, all those different allusions and Malcolm's conversations, Malcolm is saying that A, science was built on the idea that if you know enough, you can predict anything, but Gödel's theorem shows that mathematics have finite limits when it comes to explaining behavior, and Heisenberg's principle sets finite limits of what can be observed. Thus, there are limits to what can be known. Put together, as argued here by Malcolm, if science had any hope to be able to know enough in order to predict anything, Gödel and Heisenberg have shown that there are finite limits to what can be known, and therefore, consequentially, what can be predicted. Even with von Neumann's terrific computing, accounting for more variables than ever before possible, accurate predictability of complex systems, like the weather, is impossible. Malcolm says chaos theory embraces unpredictability, and calculated where the deviations in the system would occur in his report to Hammond. All right, that was a lot. Stylistic techniques. Anthropomorphization, or otherwise known as personification. But the neck tapered to an absurdly small head with a stupid gaze like a very dumb horse, is said on 154. This is Crichton playing upon the concept that a stegosaur's brain case was the size of a walnut, even though the animal itself was hugely massive. The belief has always been they must have been very simple creatures. So Crichton embraces that belief and says, therefore, it has a, quote, stupid gaze. How does a reptile have a stupid gaze? Is its tongue hanging out? Does it have buck teeth and crossed eyes? How does it look? Very stupid. Are its eyelids half closed? Does it appear sleepy? None of these things are described, even though they could. It is tranquilized, but really, this is just Crichton offering human characteristics to an animal, so readers get the idea that classic dinosaur literature is adamant that the walnut-sized brain of Stegosaurus meant that they were stupid. But I'm not sure there's any way an animal can just appear to look very dumb, any more than they appear to look anything. But for real, I'd love to know how a Stegosaurus operated with such a small brain. What were its behavioral limits? How did it interact and adapt to stimuli in its environment? What, with mathematically, basically, a peanut for a brain? It's just fascinating. Similes. A peculiar odor like rotting fish. If you've had the unfortunate, though common chance to smell rotten fish, you know how physically repulsive that is. I presume that this guy, the Stegosaur, must smell mildly of rotten fish, or else you'd probably stay right away from it. Crichton employs kind of a cliffhanger here. Then he stopped. Ellie, he said, take a look at this on 157. Some people complain that Dan Brown does this too much in his novels, making a cliffhanger out of everything. Well, Crichton does it well here, though. Perhaps using it sparingly spares him this critique as well. But the foreshadowing continues. Yes, Grant said, it's a velociraptor egg. The end. Literary techniques. The pacing. Crichton moves the narrative quickly now, not explaining that everyone got out of the Land Cruisers to inspect the animals, but rather implying it by having the characters interacting with the animal almost immediately. He rejects any formal introductions with Dr. Harding, rushing forward as the vet is merely mentioned by Regis in a passing moment. The narrative moves very quickly in this chapter. Cohesion and dramatic irony. Malcolm predicted specific areas where deviations would occur. The fitness of the animals to the environment was one area, thus predicting the Stegosaur's routine illnesses and the ability of the park to control the spread of life forms. And then, Ellie and Grant are waving their arms and shouting, "Come see what they found!" And blam! Just as Malcolm is going over how the park will fail to control the spread of life forms, he's immediately validated by the discovery of a dinosaur eggshell, showing that life forms are spreading beyond the control of the park. Dialogue. Ellie speaks primarily with Lex early in this chapter, and Lex is drawn to her because Sattler is a female probably, and perhaps a pseudo-mother figure. We can consider that. The back and forth with Dr. Harding doesn't have much conflict in it, which is fine for a normal conversation, but it's kind of a bad piece of fiction writing, where conflict equates to drama. So after a few paragraphs of Harding and Sattler investigating the sick Stegosaurus, Crichton infuses the scene with more drama from Lex, who interrupts by saying, "This is boring." Then more conflict as Tim shushes her, and they get a little disagreement. So it's not boring anymore, but we've got some conflict to make this more interesting, right? I think it would have been better if Sattler and Harding were disagreeing, but oh well. But there's a narrative dualism. We've got some conflict with the characters, as well as a puzzle to solve. You can appreciate that Crichton has identified an area where the pacing halts, so they can pause on the mystery and show some of Sattler's character, but employs a few techniques to keep it feeling punchy. And in the exposition, while Malcolm is providing a history lesson on the field of science, scientific principles, predictive modeling, and chaos theory, Crichton has Gennaro playing catch with Lex to keep things light, adding action to the exposition. And this reminds me specifically of a scriptwriting workshop I took once with the late, great Wayne MacLean from Wayne's Movie World, film script consulting in Windsor, Ontario. Wayne passed away in 2018, but I know he left a legacy of people with big ambitions to write engaging scripts, and I'll never forget one of the clips from the workshop was from A Few Good Men, the Tom Cruise movie. And Tom Cruise is running a baseball practice while arguing with some guy about an upcoming court case that they're both involved in. It's a scene of exposition, but to keep it engaging and visually interesting, there's also baseball, America's national pastime. Crichton's doing what A Few Good Men is doing. And who wrote A Few Good Men? Well, Aaron Sorkin, who only wrote distinguished scripts recognized for their writing like The Social Network, Moneyball, Molly's Game, and more. In other words, this is how you do exposition, and Crichton does that, and it's worth acknowledging it here. Discussions. Let's talk about these sick Stegos. The Stegos are sick. They're getting routinely poisoned by something, probably a toxic plant. But instead of just getting rid of the toxic plant and seeing if it has an effect on their health, they rather inspect all the bushes and dig through the diarrhea and watch them eat. Whether you can observe that they're eating the toxic berries or not, wouldn't the very first thing you obviously do be take away the toxic plants? Before digging through the crap and scanning the monitors for what they're eating all day, remember they're constant foragers, they never stop eating, you'd have to watch them around the clock to identify what it is they're eating. Also, I think traces of these toxic berries would reveal themselves in the dinosaur droppings, right? I mean, if they can inspect the droppings to spot whether the West Indian lilac isn't in them, wouldn't they also be able to tell if the West Indian lilac berries were in there at the same time? Without thinking too deeply on the matter of the six Stegos, we can agree that this little plot point is a bit contrived, but to good effect. Sattler is a great character, and this is a time for her to make an impact in the park. As a scientist, consultant, paleobotanist, and apparently a regular old botanist too, she's a tenacious problem solver, and she really shines in this moment, and there's no wonder this moment was specifically adapted into the film. Chaos theory. Malcolm gets a chance to say that he's not hoping to be right, and perhaps that he's not necessarily personally invested in the outcome of the mathematics, although he is and will be, but rather, he believes in the theory. The calculations are correct, and the outcome should be respected. Quote, "It's nothing to do with me," he says, although the character is written with enough gumption and personality that it's hard to think his self-indulgent charisma isn't being pampered while he makes his argument. He says, "Hey, the math is good. You must listen to what it says." Feeling like Malcolm only predicts things after they've happened seems too convenient for Gennaro, but then it's nice to see that one of his predictions, that life will expand, predicts the next deviation beforehand, and Gennaro also apparently didn't read Malcolm's report. How do you like that? Easter eggs. The eggshell fragment is, quote, no larger than a postage stamp on 160, which Alan Grant discovers. Positively identifying something from just a fragment is an entirely paleontologist thing to do, which is awesome. Crichton could have written that they found a whole damn nest or a bunch of eggs clear as day, but he doesn't, and I like that a lot. And Grant evokes what he knows about dinosaur eggs. Remember, he wrote the book on dinosaur babies and nesting sites, including patterning on the interior surface, the interior curve, a faint pattern of raised lines which make roughly triangular shapes. He's dug eggs like this before in Montana. The curvature of the egg is, quote, almost flat, and it's very thick, we're told on 160, making it a fragment from a, quote, very big egg, comparable to an ostrich. Grant identifies it as a velociraptor egg. Harding is Mr. Magoo. What I'm trying to say is he doesn't see very well. He's unobservant. Is Dr. Harding a good vet? He can't find toxic berries in the dinosaur spoor when he goes looking for toxins. He doesn't bother removing toxic berries from the field when the dinosaurs are mysteriously getting poisoned all the time, over a span of many months. Like, the Stegos are getting sick every 6 weeks, and also all the time. That'd suggest that it's recurred at least 3 times. That's multiple months of inaction when the extraordinarily valuable animals might die. And we're told, in an earlier chapter, that 2 stegosaurs have died. As for the dinosaur eggshell, his first instinct is that it's a bird egg, suggesting there are dozens of species on the island, which is bonkers. He has potentially seen eggshells before and been dismissive of them. Harding also refutes that the eggshell is a dinosaur egg because he believes, nay, he knows, that, quote, these dinosaurs can't breed, on page 160. Harding refutes ideas and observations that don't jive with his work, which is probably how he comes to overlook so many things on the island. And we could accept that the dinosaurs are breeding in the park, which therefore requires that there are some male animals in the park, which Harding has also failed to notice. Is it hard to identify males from females? Well, on the tour in this book, Dr. Henry Wu says, quote, sex organs vary with the species. It's easy to tell on some, subtle on others, on page 109. Extrapolating from that quote, Wu says they can identify male sex organs easily in some species and with some difficulty in other species. This suggests that he has observed male sex organs across several species, enough to make a generalization that there are 2 types of gonads, the easy-to-spot type and the hard-to-spot type. This would also require that some species be allowed to mature for long enough for the sex organs to be more obvious, or that there's some sexual dimorphism and that different genders in a single species have different shapes and sizes. In any case, it's clear that Wu, who can't even name the dinosaurs, can tell their gender by observation. But the vet hasn't. The guy who treats the animals, feeds the animals, does routine health inspections on the animals, hasn't observed that some of the animals are males and, frankly, doing the mating dance. So, like, Dr. Harding, what's up, man? Role models and feminism. Sattler connects with Lex in this chapter. The 2 females have a moment together, and it's in a generally, I guess, stereotypical role of either caregiver or nurse. And Lex gravitates to Sattler in this chapter while Sattler's doing these things. Then we get Sattler's body being described a bit more. Quote, she set off toward the field to examine the plants more closely. Her body bent over the ground, on page 156. Nobody else's body is doing stuff in this chapter. Hers is mentioned, though. Grant's body isn't mentioned. Dr. Harding's body isn't mentioned. And Crichton continues to mention some part of Sattler's anatomy, whether intentionally or not. She's continuously referred to by her body and her body parts, and that's all I got to say about that. I guess, well, leaving this conversation on a bit of an awkward note. Signing off today, I want to give a great big thank you to Gavin Michael Booth for coming back and being on the show. Good luck and everything, bud. It's always a thrill seeing what you and Sarah get up to. And I want to sign off today thanking you for joining me. If you want to read along in the book, add some thoughts to what we've been discussing on the show, or be a guest on the show and chat with me about anything you like about Jurassic Park, you can do that by connecting with me. I'm at ryansrogers@gmail.com. If you'd like to be a guest, drop me a line and we can try and set something up. We can rehash, tear down, gush over, and chit-chat about any part of the book, or also not the book, all you'd like. Jurassic Park-Cast is part of the Spring Chickens banner of amateur intellectual properties, including the Spring Chickens Funny Pages, Tomb of the Undead graphic novel, the Second Lapse graphic novelettes, The Infantry, and the worst of them all, the King Street Capers. You can find links to all that baggage in the show notes or by visiting schickens.blogspot.com or finding us on Facebook at facebook.com/springchickencapers, or me, I'm on Twitter at RogersRyan22. Thank you dearly for tuning into the Jurassic Park-Cast, the Jurassic Park podcast where we talk about the novel Jurassic Park, and also not that too. Until next time.
Sacrifice to the inhuman creature. spreads across the land. 1,000 years unending torment. Feel your hatred take